I think of Argo and Fargo, and when Marty made his cargo back in time at the mall.
Neil Patrick Harris legitimately may be the best Oscars host of the last decade.
That is not true, but the best.
Who's better? No. Who's better?
What?
Who's better than Neil Patrick Harris in the 2010s?
In the 2010s? You know what?
Maybe.
You might actually be right.
Right, because I'm like, your options are Jimmy Kimmel, Ellen DeGeneres, Seth
you know what?
MacFarlane, who gave him a run.
Or the first time Kimmel did it, he was actually very fun.
He was funny, but I wouldn't say he was better than Neil Patrick Harris. Argument you can make...
Neil Patrick Harris had just as many uber cringe moments as he did good moments.
Right, but his good moments are some of the best Oscars host moments I think of all time.
Like, I think he had that opening number, and then it just goes downhill from.
I don't agree though. Like to keep this bit pretty short, I think Neil Patrick Harris is the best host of the last decade because your only competition is Ellen, who's not.
What does he have outside of the moving pictures number?
He's just a charming guy. Like Neil Patrick Harris is just a charming, let's keep the show going guy. Kimmel is kind of funny.
He didn't keep the show going. He stopped in the middle of it to do his stupid magic trick that was really cringe.
Okay, but the magic trick is better than all of Jimmy Kimmel's best jokes.
That is not true. I
think so. I think.
You know what? Seth MacFarlane was better than NPH.
That's what I'm saying. If you're gonna say Seth MacFarlane, I can entertain that argument because Seth MacFarlane had some of the most shock humor jokes, but they were actually good. And like
Seth MacFarlane was actually smart. It was basically like, hey, I'm gonna do the Seth MacFarlane thing, but then I'm gonna be like, here's why you shouldn't have done that, and then I'm gonna do the classy thing. And like having like Daniel Radcliffe and Joseph Gordon-Levitt show up and sing High Hopes is like actually one of my favorite
it's a fun idea. Seth MacFarlane is legitimately the only person for the last decade that I would entertain as being competition to Neil Patrick Harris. Because I think Ellen's bad. I think Billy Crystal's final time is a little tired. I think that
I kind of like Franco doing it with the.
I don't hate him. I just think it's like tired. Like
also, what about Martin and Baldwin?
That's 2009, but I guess that's fair.
Well, it's
I guess for the 2010 ceremony, sure, fine. If we're gonna do that, Baldwin pulls Martin back, but you're right, Martin's really good. I think it's the same thing where I think Anne Hathaway's really good, but James Franco's really holding her back.
That's true. Okay, well, we probably should do it. It's been 2.5 minutes, so we should probably actually introduce the show. Hi, I'm Caleb Wilbert-Altman. That's Caleb Coho. This is FilmograFeed. We are talking about Ben Affleck's next movie, Argo. I say we just jump into it. I feel like Argo is one of those movies that would actually probably have a better reputation if it didn't win Best Picture.
I agree. I think Argo is one of those movies that, like, when you watch it, you actually kind of really understand why it did win. Like, I don't think it should have won. But it's in my top 3 or 4 from that class, if I'm being perfectly honest with myself.
It's not a great class, but yeah.
It's not a great class, but I think it's a very fun, good, serviceable movie. And you can see how a movie about how film saved lives, the film industry helped save lives, would win Best Picture. You can understand how that movie got traction enough to be nominated, let alone win. And also the fact that it's Ben Affleck and George Clooney producing the movie and both become 2-time Oscar winners with that movie winning Best Picture. You can understand in your mind how this movie wins Best Picture over things like Django Unchained and Lincoln, which I think are far superior films.
Especially when you do consider that Affleck wasn't nominated for director. And I think the argument of Argo might not have won picture had he won director is a little tired because, frankly, I don't know what the second place option was. Like, I don't think they would ever give it to Life of Pi for picture. I just don't see that happening. So I don't.
Absolutely not.
But anyway.
I think especially when you break down that class, you have things like Beasts of the Southern Wild, which has no shot. You have like Life of Pi and Les Miserables, which are like, you would think they're contenders, but they're really not. And like Django Unchained, which was like super, like a secret, really strong Best Picture winner contender in the group, especially when you consider like Tarantino's also not up for director, but he wins his screenplay and Waltz wins supporting actor, and it's really beloved already. Like it's an instant classic sort of thing. You could see Django as a subversion of a classic Hollywood genre winning. You could see Lincoln being Spielberg's victory lap Best Picture win, but it comes down to Ben Affleck, who is at this point in his career on a hot streak. He is on 2 films directed, 2 for 2 hits, 2 for 2 nominations on performances. He makes it 3 for 3 with Alan Arkin on this. He's nominated. That guy, he directed a performance to an Oscar nomination. He directs Chris Terrio to an Academy Award winning script. Affleck himself does not get nominated, but he wins for producing. And you go through the cast, and it's an editing nominee. Alexander Desplat's score gets nominated, but you're like, why? It's like a nothing score, but it's Desplat and it's Affleck, and that's how much people like the movie. And you go through and you see the technicals it gets and the above the line it gets. And even though people are like, Arkin, I think Arkin's the best performance in the movie. I'll stand by that. I think he and John Goodman are close, but they're both very good performances.
I think Arkin is the best performance in the movie, but weirdly, I don't think he should have been nominated.
Weirdly, I went the other way, where I used to think he was like, why is he nominated? And I watched it again this time, and I'm like, you know what? I get it. Like, I also
I get it. I don't think it's crazy that they nominated him, but I wouldn't give him the nomination.
Fair, I would. And I think that when it comes down to it, Arkin's really fun, Goodman's really fun, and Cranston's really fun. So you have 3 really fun, good supporting actor performances that could have gotten it, but Arkin's the veteran.
You're telling me he makes your 5 for that year?
Probably at 5, but yes, he makes my 5.
That's fair. Like, because that DiCaprio didn't get in.
Which, that's crazy. But I don't think Arkin's my cut. Like, I also stand by that this is a really good supporting actor 5. Like, I think all 5 performances are very good. I just don't necessarily think that the best.
I don't think Jones is all that good.
I really like. We defer. You like Lincoln probably more than I do as a movie, but I like Tommy Lee Jones as a performance more than you do, which is a weird thing because I think he's great. I think Jones is great. I think Arkin is great. I think Waltz is the deserving winner of the category. On a recent watch of Django Unchained, I think he's the deserving winner of the bunch. He's fantastic. I think Philip Seymour Hoffman's giving a legendary final nomination performance in The Master, like a great.
This is my winner of the category,
and that is very fair. I think Hoffman's killing it. And I think De Niro's great in Silver Linings Playbook. I think that is a really strong comedic De Niro performance. So, like, you have a really good 5 even without DiCaprio. But if you're, like, gun to your head, who you cutting? Weirdly enough, it's De Niro. Like, I would cut De Niro in Silver Linings for DiCaprio before I cut Arkin.
Fair. I would cut Jones, but that's fair.
And I understand that one, too. That would be the next one out.
I would also cut Arkin. I would nominate De Niro. I think De Niro is better than Arkin, and I would put in Edward Norton from Moonrise Kingdom, baby.
Which I've never seen.
What the heck is going on here?
So the story behind Argo is kind of fun. So Chris Terrio,
1979 Iranian hostage crisis.
No, in 2007. Chris Terrio reads an article called How the CIA Used a Fake Sci-Fi Flick to Rescue Americans from Tehran, which was published in The Wire. He writes a script out of it and brings it to George Clooney, Grant Heslov, and David Klawans, who set up a project basically at the same time using a different article. And so the group of them make it. They go through a couple of different directors. They've never disclosed who they were. The assumptions are that they talked to people like Scorsese, which is weird. They did talk at one point of Clooney himself directing it, which I don't think would have been bad, but I also don't think would have been great.
It would have worked because here's the thing about George Clooney, and I would love to do.
He is a directing chameleon, and we will do Clooney one day on FilmograFeed.
We will do Clooney because it'd be fun. Clooney can't be himself. So if Clooney directed this, and especially if they talked to Scorsese, it would be Clooney trying to make a Scorsese movie. Or it would be him trying to make a Michael Mann movie or a De Palma movie.
And here's the thing about Clooney that we'll say real quick to hint at what the series would be like. Like you said, he would be trying to make someone else, and he would do a good job of imitating their style. Clooney's really good as a director of distilling someone else's style into what makes that style good. And then somehow not entirely being able to do it successfully, but enough where you're like, okay, so that's what that for person's version of that movie would be, slightly distilled. It's why, like, you watch Suburbicon and Leatherheads and you're like, oh, this would be like a Coen Brothers movie if the Coens didn't give it to themselves. Or like, and the Ides of March is a Fincher movie, whatever. But we'll talk about that later. Ben Affleck gets the job based on The Town while filming The Town. The Town comes out. It's a major hit. And in 2011, they make the public announcement that Ben Affleck is going to be involved as a producer and potentially as a writer and potentially a director. But he's involved in the film. In June, in 2011, Arkin is announced to be the first person cast in the movie by Ben Affleck himself, who confirms he's directing the film but not writing. And then he goes through and he announces the rest of the cast one by one. He announces John Goodman. He announces he himself is going to be in the starring role. Apparently, that was Clooney's call, not Affleck's, is that Affleck plays the main part, which I think is actually a really good call by Clooney, because you could totally see this part being a George Clooney part. And, like, Clooney could have easily given this part to himself and done, like, a heroic version of Syriana, and instead is like, let's give it to Ben. I think Ben would be better for this part than I would. When you have two very established Academy Award-winning actors like that, and he's like, I won't do it. Let's give Ben the role. It's kind of impressive.
No disrespect to Ben, but I'm imagining Clooney reading some of this dialogue, and I think it actually would have been better.
I disagree. I think Affleck is better for the role he's in, but I think Clooney should have been in the movie. I think the part that Clooney should have been in.
You want him to be the Cranston part?
I think he should be the Cranston role. Because while I think Bryan Cranston is great, I think when you say the words George Clooney and you say pick a role in the movie for George Clooney, the Bryan Cranston part is a slam dunk, home run, best supporting actor nomination for George Clooney. And Clooney himself essentially goes, I'm good. I won't be in the movie. I just want to produce it. Which is, like, really good on him that he basically turned down an Academy Award nomination as an actor again, which he hasn't had since The Descendants.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not very long after this point. But, like, still, he's not been nominated for an Academy Award for acting since The Descendants. And he could have done back-to-back nominations and really established George Clooney as an actor again, as an Academy Award caliber, and kept that thread going. But he's like, I want to be a producer, and I'm going to prove, like the Mel Brooks song, and really wants to prove that he's really good at what he does and what he wants to do, and wins an Oscar for it. And you're like, man, good on George Clooney for being like, no, I'm going to let the guy from Breaking Bad take my part. Like, that's kind of impressive if you think about it when you're George Clooney.
I mean, to be fair, it's not like Bryan Cranston wasn't on a major hot streak at that time.
I mean, true. But I think it is kind of fun that, like, he himself is like, you know what, I'm good.
Do you have any other background stuff before we start?
I do. So Ben Affleck goes through, and he's the reason why the soundtrack is as fucking fire as it is. He goes through and specifically bookmarks Little TNA by the Rolling Stones, Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits, Dance the Night Away by Van Halen, and When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin. And he's like, I want all these songs in the movie. And the reason why the budget for this movie is, like, bigger than you'd expect is those 4 songs. And Ben Affleck's like, nope.
Led Zeppelin doesn't play around, man. Led Zeppelin does not play around. If you want to put one Led Zeppelin song in your movie, you better be ready for that to take up about half your budget. Like,
right. And, like, on top of that, even Warner Brothers themselves were like, we'll pony up the money for these songs. And Ben goes, on top of that, Ben then has the balls to be like, you know what? I also don't want you to use your logo. I want you to use your classic 70s and 80s logo. And they were like, you know what? Sure, why not? Which is then why they do it in Joker. Like, because Argo does it first, they do it in Joker. And they make that a thing.
Like, okay, do you have anything else to add? Because I want to talk about the way this movie opens. Because
we can jump into the opening right after I finish the point that this is the screenplay is then used by the CIA to cover up other things. Like, they basically use the film Argo to cover up retroactively other things they did. Weirdly enough, so, like, the CIA uses the movie Argo for their own modern day purposes. It's weird. I don't have better examples because they're the CIA. I don't have better examples because the CIA doesn't tell us the shit, but they basically say that when you join the CIA, you have to watch Argo. Like, they make you watch Argo to be in the CIA now, which is kind of weird. And then additionally, Spielberg himself has said that this is one of the best scripts he's ever read. He was one of 26 people who were delivered this script upon its completion. Spielberg said he was not interested in developing it or directing it, but he really enjoyed reading it. And when he saw the movie, he thought it was really great. So I think Spielberg's probably one of the people who voted Argo for Best Picture. Other notable people who have said this is great. Roger Ebert said this is an incredibly well-made movie and that Ben Affleck deserves Best Director. Ebert was on the Affleck for director train. Barack Obama says this is one of his favorite movies of 2012. It's kind of crazy, and even the Nation of Iran were like very split on whether or not to like Argo, but like half the country of Iran is like Argo's great, which is really fucking weird. Anyway, Argo has a major cultural impact 10 years later, and we don't realize it because we don't talk about Argo. Anyway, let's talk about the opening movie.
Anyway, yeah. This movie opens. We get the Warner Brothers classic 70s logo, which already like hype. In general, logo changes in movies are awesome. When you're going that extra mile to like change the logo, I don't care what it is, you get me hyped. Cat in the Hat, awful movie. They do the DreamWorks logo in like classic Dr. Seuss style, and it gets me hyped. So whenever you do like the logo in like a different style, I get hyped. So we do that, and then boom, we're getting the backstory of the Iran, invasion or the history of Iran, but we're getting it. Essentially, we're watching a storyboard version of it, which is such a creative and cool play that I completely forgot was in the movie. Because like nothing like that ever happens later, but it's such like a cool way to do your prologue and kind of set up the theme of the movie, is to basically just, hey, here's the storyboarded version of like the history of Iran up to this point, which is dope.
Yes, and I think that background is really great. I think if we've learned one thing about Ben Affleck as a director, is he's really good at establishing context and tone and time period in a very short amount of time. He's very good at taking 2-3 minutes and doing the exact thing he needs to do to put you in the exact place you need to be to watch this movie. This opening is tense as fuck. He like establishes the tension of the two sides of the conflict. He establishes how we got here, and he establishes why this is important in the span of 4 minutes, using archive footage, songs, and his own script opening scene in the embassy. And in that immediate opening, Ben does such an incredible, and we keep calling him Ben like we know him. Ben does such a great job of like establishing the world we live in, the time period we're in, and why you should be nervous for the people involved, and why things are boiling over. I think that's a really impressive job from him.
Yeah. And then we get the great sequence of the 6 people actually being, the building being taken over and the tension there, which is just a really well-directed sequence. And then we get the, kind of the backstory of that. And then we get Tony Mendez, Ben Affleck's character, and they're all kind of coming up with different ways to get these hostages out of, or not really hostages, but these people who have not been taken hostages out of the Canadian embassy. And basically all the ideas they have suck. And I forgot what movie inspires Ben Affleck to do this, and this is what inspires his character to like come up with the movie pitch. And then it's like, boom, Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which is just such a random movie.
As someone who has had to watch this movie an ungodly amount of times for trivia, this movie is trash. And when he watches this movie and it gives him the idea, you sit here and you're like, is Battle for the Planet of the Apes only cultural footprint that it inspired a picture winner? And you're like, wow, this movie's so bad. But like, I love that. I kind of love the idea that a bad sci-fi movie inspires us to save Americans from an intense situation. So, weirdly enough, the director of Battle for the Planet of the Apes is an American hero. I kind of hate it, but I love it.
That's a good point.
I love that. That's the thing I love.
Is that J. Lee Thompson who did that one?
I believe J. Lee Thompson does the last one because he does the third one and the last one, right? Or does he do the second one and the last one?
Okay, hold on. I'm going to look it up. Yeah, J. Lee Thompson.
Well, perfect. So us two basically retired fandom competitors just nailed that. Anyway.
To be fair, I know that because that's the guy who directed Guns of Navarone.
Weirdly enough. weirdly enough, the Guns of Neverone. Academy Award
In
nominee.
the original Cape Fear.
Jaylee Thompson is an Academy Award nominee. Like, the directors of the
Yeah.
Eggs franchise films are all, like, Academy Award nominated actors and directors, composers, and actors. And you're like, this weird, cheesy, bad sci-fi franchise has inspired so many Academy Awards. Anyway, including this one.
We're going off on tangents tonight.
I love it. No, I love it. I think this show's more fun when we ride tangents.
That's
But
true.
I think that Argo, this opening, and Ben Affleck's performance, I think Ben's performance is actually surprisingly underrated. We don't talk about it enough. He's not flashy. He doesn't do a lot. But there are moments in his performance, like when he talks to his son on the phone, where you're really connected and dialed into what Ben's performance is about, which is just really tender, humanistic performance. And I think that's really special from a guy who's like, I'm also directing the movie, so I'm not going to do a lot, but I'm going to give myself the opportunity to explore this person while letting other people get the spotlight around me. Ben's really good at that. From The Town to this, and potentially Air, and what we're talking about next week. Ben's really good at being the star of the movie to sell the vehicle, but he never makes the movie about himself. He plays the main character, but the main character in his movies are never the most interesting person or the most flashy person, and that's a disservice to himself in terms of, like, what can I do as an actor, but it's a service to the movie and the people around him, where he lets other people get the spotlight shine, like Arkin and Goodman and Cranston, who all are really, really good, in my opinion.
I do agree with that. And speaking of Goodman, the CIA enlists the help of makeup artists that they had worked with before to kind of be their
fire
contact.
introduction in this movie.
2012 John Goodman introductions. It is weird that there are two of them. Like, Flight, technically it's not his introduction, but I will never not associate this song Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones with anything other than John Goodman with his grown-up ponytail walking into a room about to give Denzel Washington cocaine. Like...
But I think John Goodman is an actor that I'm surprised not only doesn't have an Academy Award, but at least 4 nominations in his career. And this is the year where you would really think they would have given him his career Oscar.
You think they wouldn't have at least given him a nomination for, like, Flight? I would have been happy.
Flight or this. Because even in this, while he's not the biggest supporting role, he's still really good. Like,
I think
really
Arkin,
good.
I like him in this. I think the problem is he's pretty much always next to Arkin, who I think does outshine him most of the movie. So I think that's kind of his big hurdle to come over.
I agree, but
it's very fun in this. In general, John Goodman just rules. John Goodman just rules. Like,
John Goodman rules. John Goodman rules, and he is always really, really solid, even in the non-flashy parts. And I think that his performance in Argo is like the exact kind of performance they would nominate at the Academy Awards, and he crushes it. And you're like, it's frustrating that the supporting actor race is as good as it is, so that you even have people who didn't get in, like DiCaprio, like Bardem, like, all sorts of people. And John Goodman could have totally fit in a weaker, like, if Argo comes out in 2011, you could make a really good case that John Goodman gets nominated with Arkin, and people vote John Goodman to win because he doesn't have one yet. Like, there's a shot. There's a real good shot. And it's like, I think it's nuts that Goodman doesn't have a nomination. But in 2012, when he has 2 very flashy, in comparison to the rest of his stuff, performances in 2 very high-profile Academy Award nominees, one of which is the Best Picture winner, that Goodman's not one of the people you nominate feels weird.
I just realized it is funny. If I had a nickel for every time John Goodman was in a movie where he plays a man who works on B movies, and also Bryan Cranston is in it, I'd have 2 nickels. Because Trumbo, which John Goodman's great in Trumbo. I love John Goodman in Trumbo. Any movie where John Goodman gets to threaten somebody with a baseball bat is a good time. But anyway, I digress. So they put him, so John Chambers, who is John Goodman's character, puts him in touch with Lester Siegel, a producer played by Alan Arkin. And this is when they start setting up a phony film production company. and start putting together the script of Argo. Which this is where I don't know what it is, but like I have a feeling that this movie was kind of restructured in editing, because there are points where, you know, it's like, well, like when they're choosing the script, they're not looking for a sci-fi movie. Like Alan Arkin brings up non-sci-fi stuff, and then but before that they're talking like it needs to be a sci-fi movie. So it's a little disjointed in that regard.
I think that's a fair point. I think that is not necessarily on Affleck or the editing. I think that comes down to Terrio. Weirdly enough, I think here's the thing. Chris Terrio is the real winner of Argo. His career is a huge success because of Argo. But I don't think Chris Terrio is a good writer, because the things he goes on to write from here are not movies that I think are slam dunk home run good things. He writes The Rise of Skywalker. He writes Batman v Superman. He writes blockbusters that don't succeed and are critically reviled by fan bases. He's not that good of a writer. To be fair,
those are all movies where there's so much production turmoil behind the scenes.
Sure, but I mean,
and power struggles that I don't know.
Martha is still a script level decision that was on a script page with his name on it.
You wonder, though, if that was him or if that was Snyder, kind of. Or that could have been Goyer, too. That could be Goyer.
Which Goyer, I don't really think has much to do with, if anything, on BVS.
He's literally also written, like,
is he a screenplay or a story? Because that's my question.
Oh, fair. I mean,
I know he wrote a draft. He's written many drafts of this movie. I just don't know if he wrote a draft that worked, because if he
I don't know. I don't want to get into this. I don't want to get into this wormhole.
Anyway, Chris Terrio is not my favorite writer in the world, but I do think his script for the most part is really solid on this. And I do agree, but I do think the thing that the movie does really well is bring you walk you through the steps of why things need to happen to make this work. And then when they get Arkin and they're like, we need a producer. You need a producer with credits to make a fake movie and put their name on it. Is like when John Goodman lays it all out, you're like, that's really fucking funny. And then Arkin being like, I'm accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award. You got like 5 seconds, sell me on it. And have him be like, this is fucking dumb. And then see the thing on the TV and he's like, we're going to need an office. And you're just like, you see, they basically don't even need to appeal to Arkin's vanity, because he sees what's going on. He's like, I can help my country. I'm going to do it. And you see both Goodman's motivations and Arkin's motivations are the same, but established in different ways for different reasons. And to see Arkin then go through the things where, like, he's so good. Like, this character is so good at his job, where he's like, if I'm going to produce a fake movie, it's going to be a fake hit. Is like great. Like, the way that Lester Siegel is presented in this movie is really, really fun. And I think that Arkin crushes it as being like, we need a good one, and like talk about why they can't do westerns. Like, westerns are expensive. We can do a western. And John Goodman's like, but westerns in Iran, why are we going to Iran? And like they like lay out why it has to be the exact way it happened. And you believe that reality.
Then we get to them actually setting up the script reading of Argo, which, let's talk about this. If Argo was a real movie, it would suck, right?
Oh, it'd be terrible. They basically picked a script that would turn into a Flash Gordon style cult sci-fi hit.
Yeah, and like, I mean, obviously they say it's a Star Wars ripoff, and like you can tell with a lot of like the character designs that they're going all in on that. But anyway, I do love like the press event for Argo, because then you get the great moment where Alan Arkin, who is like just not wanting to have this reporter ask him questions, and we get him saying, Argo, fuck yourself, which is, you know, the line.
It becomes the mantra where like later they're like, Argo, fuck yourself. He's like, Argo, fuck yourself. And that's like their success rate of being like, we got this. And I love that. I think that's really fun that becomes what they like say to each other, to be like, all right, we got this.
Could you imagine if there were some people who like took something ridiculous like that, or if they took, let's say there were two people who like would just say back and forth something like computers aren't paintings.
Fuck you.
Could you could you imagine?
Can't imagine. It's kind of a weird idea. I don't know who in the right mind would do that. Maybe some people who would also host a mini series about Aaron Sorkin films that will be back in 2-3 weeks. But I
Computers
think
aren't
that
paintings.
fuck you. I think that Ben Affleck. I think Ben Affleck and Bryan
You're
Cranston
gonna
actually
be dying on your deathbed,
and
and
computers
we're
aren't
gonna be
paintings.
old men. And the last thing I'm ever gonna say to you is computers aren't paintings.
And my
you're
last
gonna
words
say,
will be
"Fuck
forced to be fuck you. And honestly,
And
fuck
then
you
you're
being my
gonna
last words would be
flatline.
perfect for me. Okay, but fuck you would be the perfect final words for me, but we won't get into that on this podcast. That we'll save that for like Steve Jobs. Anyway,
We will talk about this when we get to Steve Jobs.
yeah, we'll talk about this when we get to Steve Jobs. Argo, fuck yourself, is one of the best lines in the movie. Where I love that when they do the press event and each person's interviewed about it, and John Goodman gives a good answer. Ben Affleck gives a good answer, which I love the line earlier in the movie where they're like, "You got to be a producer." He's like, "You're an associate producer at best," and they're like, basically like doing the press event for this, and they all are swarming Lester because he's like the guy with credits, and he's like, "What's Argo?" He's like, "I don't know." It's like, "What's it mean?" He goes, "I mean, it's Argo, fuck yourself." It's just like such a great line and a great moment, and honestly, should have been his Oscar clip. I don't remember what his Oscar clip was, but if it wasn't that, what are we doing?
It's hard. I mean, they don't like to do the ones with profanity in them, but that's valid.
Which sucks because some of the best lines in the movie are the ones with profanity at Colin Farrell and the Banshees of Inisherin. Anyway,
That's a good point. Yeah. Anyway, our Carrie Condon in Banshees of Inisherin.
exactly.
You're all freaking boring. Anyway, so then Mendez gets to Iran, and they basically sets them up, and I love the people, the hostages, whatever you want to call them, the prisoners, whatever. They don't go along with it right away. Like, this is such an interesting dynamic of they are very skeptical, and there's a lot of tension between them and Tony. And I think that's great, and I kind of love him trying to convince them that this is the way that makes sense.
Right, and I think that this is where
And
Bryan
that's where I
does.
wish it would have been Clooney, because I think Clooney would have delivered some of that dialogue so well.
I agree, and I think Cranston and Affleck have a good rapport, and Cranston I buy as being in a bubble the head of the CIA in this sense, but I think Clooney would have sold this better in the sense of like we have
but fair.
I'm talking about my end, where if you on the flip side, where Clooney being in the Cranston role, I think would sell their friendship even better than Cranston does. And I think that Clooney in that part being the guy who's in charge of everything, especially when we get to the end and we get to the control room sort of sequence that he has, Clooney in that part would have made more sense to me than Cranston and would have crushed. And it's specifically this scene where Clooney would have to tell Affleck, or Cranston tells Affleck, rather, that they're going with the teachers, and Affleck basically being like "fuck you," and Arkin and Goodman basically being like, "When your movie doesn't go down, you basically have to just keep working on it anyway, and hoping that it works," and basically giving them the advice they would give if the movie was actually real and then canceled, and they go for it and have that end up working out. Yeah. And like I kind of really love that approach, and that's why I think Arkin and Goodman are like a really good tandem in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are. And then we get, I love the scene once they finally get him on board, where they have them go downtown posing as these Canadian, or as these Canadian filmmakers, and you get the great moment at the bazaar where one of the people takes a picture, and there's this confrontation, and it gets really tense. And I think that's a great scene. This movie's great at building tension.
I think that's something that Affleck is doing the best at, is he makes these really fucking tense moments feel like make or break death. And that's why I still stand by it's nuts he's not nominated. Because I think this movie is probably his best job, singular best job as a director, even if it's not my favorite movie that he's made. I think he directs this so smartly and so well, where he like basically deals with this scope and scale of what we're doing, but makes it feel super personal and intimate and makes you so edge of your seat sweating for these people.
Fair. I think The Town is still a better directing job, but valid.
I think The Town's a better movie. I think that's a better script. Like, I think that's just a movie that has a much better conceit and a plot and a really well crafted film, and I think it's well directed. But I think when it comes to when I look at the film as a whole and the things that the director would do and craft in these moments, I think Affleck's control of tension, control of tone, control of scale, even though it's not a massive epic Lawrence of Arabia scale film, it still has a very good sense of scope where it's like a lot is at stake if they don't do this, but it feels super personal. I think there's a lot of very not flashy things that Affleck does as a director that makes it like honestly a phenomenal job for him behind the camera. And I think he should have been nominated. Full stop. I wouldn't have given him the Oscar for directing, but I would have nominated him full stop for this. I think it's masterful work from a guy that we don't think of as a director first. Honestly,
Yeah,
we don't even think of Affleck as a director second. We think of him as a writer second because of Good Will Hunting. So it's like for a guy who's like third strength of suit is directing for most people, it's like Academy Award winning level stuff as a director in this for me.
Yeah. And then we get the scene where they're trying to actually get them onto the Swiss Air flight. And I love this moment where, the tension's at its highest, and the guy who is very skeptical just starts breaking down everything about this fictional movie Argo. And it's like a great, like, just heck yeah moment. And they get on the plane, and there's all these things that are like so close to going wrong that just go right in the last second. And they get on the plane. Like, that's a fist pumper moment right there.
That third act is probably the singular best stretch of filmmaking Affleck has ever done in his life, where it's the actual extraction of the hostages, where they get to the airport and you have them have to believably do their covers, and in rehearsal of the covers they've all blown it all the time over and over and over, to have them get their covers just right that one time that they need to then have them sit there and like Goodman or Arkin barely get to the phone in time to answer. Like he does such a great job of building all of these moments where it's like the exact thing needs to happen in this exact moment to make this exact plan work. But we've done the prep to make sure that it can work. And those payoffs, one after the other, where it's just barely, and each one feels like you're riding a roller coaster and you're right about to go over the drop every time. And each of those it's just little things to get there. Is he going to answer the phone in time or not? Do they believe the storyboards or not? Does he see the ad in the newspaper for Argo or not? Does the plane take off or not in time? And it's like all these very quick back to back to back build and retention relief that just drives it home for me that this is Affleck's best job as a director. He's such a masterful controller of tone and tension, and it's nuts to me that this movie's third act is that exhilarating when all they're doing is getting people out of an airport.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And then I do love this kind of kicker of, he's in this situation and he's never going to get the credit for it. And then eventually he does, but it's like nobody can know. Nobody can know what you did. And that's like such a great like ending note for the film. So yeah, that's Argo. I like it. I think there are some places where it drags, but overall, I do like it. I don't think it deserved quite what it got, but it's good.
I think Argo is a really underrated Best Picture winner at this point, where the pendulum is swung back the other way, kind of like the King's Speech, where it's like this movie is not well regarded or liked as much as it used to be. It was loved at the time, and then it beat things that are definitively better movies than it. But for what the movie is, it is a very good movie. It's a very good movie.
Don't
and like
you
it's
dare
not
put this in the same category as The King's Speech. They are
I think The
different
King's
levels
Speech
of
won.
quality.
I diskagree. I think The King's Speech is a very good movie. I just don't think it's
You're a slut for Jeffrey Rush, and that is all
I
there
am.
is.
That's not true. I am, but also I think the movie's like a good movie. I just think like,
It's a fine movie.
I think you watched The King's Speech at 10 years old after watching The Social
I
Network.
watched
Fuck
it
be my favorite
again,
movie.
so that's a lie. I literally watched it like 3 months ago.
We need to do Tom Hooper on this show just so we can yell about every single movie he ever does.
Nuts with a ball clipper or not a ball clip. What's the freaking
Jesus
pliers?
Christ.
Pliers. That's what hedge clippers. Pliers.
Listen, I would love to talk about why The King's Speech is a good movie, but what I will say for Argo is like I think Argo gets too much hate in the sense of it's kind of the definitive take on Hollywood, awarding Hollywood points for doing a good thing and like loving themselves a little too much. And this is like the movie that kind of people point to and they're like, Hollywood just likes to applaud itself. When this movie's not necessarily the most outwardly like we love Hollywood ever thing. It's just like a really unique, interesting, true story where Hollywood happens to be involved.
I think it's because the 2010s was kind of full of that in terms of the Oscars. Like outside of 4 of the 6 Best Picture winners being movies rock, like, or being movie behind the scenes, like The Artist, this, Birdman, Shape of Water, like all of those are like industry movies. You also have La La Land, which of course didn't win, but
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which didn't win.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like
I get it. This is a very like Hollywood rocks heavy decade, but like Argo, weirdly enough to me, doesn't feel like it's trying to be that. It just happens to touch into that, and that's why it won. But Argo is more about a triumph of the human spirit and like taking care of each other than it is about Hollywood being the ones to do it. Like it just happens that Hollywood helps them in the cover, but it's like I feel like Argo is about so much more than just like Hollywood's great. And like I think Argo is a very good thriller, like a very good political thriller that is a really solid film with a lot to say that's really well made. And while it really isn't my vote to win Best Picture, I would nominate it. I think it's one of the 10 best movies of 2012. I think it's a really solid movie, a really fun movie, and an entertaining, good piece of time, and a really good piece of directing with some really good performances in it. And on the whole, I would say Argo, while not my favorite film Ben's made, is one of the best jobs I've seen him do is his best job as a director so far. And I think it is a very good movie that I wouldn't have given the Best Picture Oscar to, but I'm not mad one. I'm really not mad Argo was a Best Picture winner. Like, I love Django Unchained, I love Lincoln, and I love Silver Linings Playbook, and I would vote for all 3 over this in a heartbeat. But I think Argo is my 4th place for picture. I think Argo is a very good movie, and I really have no issues with it being a Best Picture winner at the end of the day.
Fair enough. Well, next week we are going to be talking Live by Night, which I have never seen.
I'm so excited for this episode. I haven't seen this movie since theaters. I'll tell you right now, spoiler, I've already started watching it piece by piece as much as I can in the moments that I have. I'm like 20 minutes in. And I forgot how much I really kind of like some of the elements of this movie. And I'm so excited to see your thoughts on it because I really liked this in 2016 and I don't remember why or much about it at all. So for me, this is basically a first time watch with the exception of like, I remember very limited things about it. More so that it just my knowledge of it basically limits to it kind of just exists. I'm just so interested in your thoughts on Ben Affleck going back in time to make a period gangster film that is very at its core taps into things that Gangs of New York's trying to say and doesn't.
See, that excites me, but then I hear about everything else and I'm like, I don't know.
The movie has so many ideas, and I think that's either going to be a thing you like or a thing you don't like. Because I've read the book Live by Night, and the book Live by Night is massive. It is a thick book. It almost should be a mini series, But Ben makes a 2-hour movie out of Live by Night, and it's kind of good. And I'm kind of interested to see your thoughts. I'm also just really excited to see what you think of Ben Affleck doing a period gangster film as a director, because it's weird. And then I'm very excited because then next week we're seeing Air in theaters and coming back the following week to talk about it. And the hype around Air is nuts at this point in time. To give a cultural touchstone, Air is like a huge hit on South by Southwest to the point where you're not watching the shows that it's being talked about on. But when sports talk shows start talking about the movies, it's a big deal. Like, the only time that sports talk shows that I can remember took a break from the season in sports to talk about a movie, it was The Dark Knight, because everyone was talking about The Dark Knight. So, like,
to be fair, Air is a sports adjacent
a sports adjacent thing.
Basketball season, so that feels
True.
a little different.
True, but I think it's kind of I think it is a huge deal when, like, Draft Day didn't get this kind of press. Moneyball didn't get this kind of press. In sports talk shows, they didn't stop to talk about it. But they
But also, were those cut? Like, did Moneyball come out during baseball season?
Yes. Moneyball came out at the height of baseball playoffs, like the time to talk about baseball. So, like, and Draft Day came out right around actual draft time.
But so also, like, both of those movies, from what I understand, kind of tick off the sports people.
A little, but like the thing is, the sports show still didn't talk about them, which is crazy because even if they made them mad, it was a point of conversation. So, like, to me, the fact that a sports show is taking time to talk about a movie is a big fucking deal. They didn't talk about American Underdog, like, and that came out at the height of Kurt Warner is a Legend mania on football season, where it was like Kurt Warner was back in the circle and was hired to be a commentator again, and people were like, Kurt Warner's back, he's back in the world of football, and there's a movie about him, and no one talked about it. And like, there's not a lot of football movies that come out that pertain to the industry of sports, and they didn't talk about it. So, like, that's my thing, is like, sports shows don't talk about movies often, but like Colin Cowherd did an entire segment on his damn show about Air, so, which is he's done 3 segments now about Air. So that's kind of huge. Not only 1, 3. So I know that we're in the point of the season where sports talk is not huge at this point in the year because it's heating up into basketball playoffs, and we're in the right before the draft and free agency in football. So it's kind of a lull, but still, the point is movies don't get talked about on sports shows ever. And Air is like been a point of conversation on multiple sports shows multiple times in multiple days over multiple weeks now, and that's
I will say, for the record, I'm so pumped for Air. I am.
Me too. The interviews that Ben and Matt have done for this are really cool. Like, I'm really into this, and like, Ben says that Viola Davis's performance is the best performance that he's gotten out of an actor since he's been directing. And that's really cool because he directed Jeremy Renner, Amy Ryan, and Alan Arkin to Academy Award-nominated performances, which makes me wonder, is Air, even though it came out in April, an Oscar contender?
I think it will be.
I think it will be.
I
think Air is going to be a big fucking deal at the Oscars this fall, especially because Everything Everywhere All at Once was like a March release and crushed for a year straight.
I don't think the timing matters anymore.
I don't think it does.
Everything Everywhere All at Once came out in spring. Coda came out in the middle of the year.
Right, Coda premiered in January at Sundance. So people were seeing Coda almost a full year before it won an Academy Award.
Coda, Parasite was like middle of the year.
Parasite, like August.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird. Like, I mean, and even then, like, the nominees too are like things that don't matter anymore. Where it's like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was a blockbuster summer release. It doesn't really matter when things come out anymore. But I think Air is going to be a really big Oscar contender, and I'm going to be very happy about it if it gets like picture and director and supporting actor. And I think we're living in a world where Viola is probably not for this movie in a year from now, and that's kind of really cool to see Viola get another nomination for the bucket. I want to see Matt Damon get nominated again. I want to see another Matt Damon acting nomination because I really love Matt Damon, and like, he doesn't get nominated anymore because he kind of just picks the wrong shit all the time. But like, The Martian was a really good performance, and he got nominated for that. and it's almost 10 years since that. And apparently, this is his best performance since The Talented Miss Ripley in 1999, which is nuts. Like, reviews are calling it his best since Ripley. People are saying this is Affleck's best job as a director, even better than Argo. People are saying this is like a phenomenal script. I don't even know who wrote it. I like people saying this is Bateman's best performance. The people saying this is Affleck's best performance, which is crazy. There's so much hype for this for me that I'm trying to put it down where it's at. But Air has me so hype. I love behind the scenes sports stories, and I think our episode on it is going to be really cool.
That's fair. Well, my internet's starting to cut out, so I think it's about time to say goodbye. So, thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you, Coho. Thank you to Video Store for hosting us. And we will see you next week talking about Live by Night. See you later.